It's time for another Dice Tower review with Randy White and Mark Streed.
Hello folks, welcome to Board Game Corner. I'm Mark.
And I'm Randy.
Welcome to our new look and feel for the show. We have a new logo, a new set. Please comment and let us know what you think.
Here at Board Game Corner, one of our primary goals is to give you information so you know whether a game is worth the money it takes to buy or even the time it takes to play. There are a lot of games out there that are very glossy on the outside, very colorful, but when it comes right down to it, they're not that fun to play. This week we'll be covering the reverse of that. A game that is not very flashy on the outside, the components are not all that glossy, but it does have an interesting game mechanic.
Definitely.
The game is called Mykerinos, and it involves unearthing and excavating ancient Egyptian treasures and placing them in a museum for display. To find out more about it, let's
Head to the table.
This is the main board and components for Mykerinos. You can see here on the main board an architectural overview of the rooms in the museum in which you'll be displaying the artifacts you discovered during your excavations. You can also see on the right side of the board a depiction of the 5 patrons to whom you will be appealing during the 2nd through 4th seasons of the game. At the beginning of the game, each player is given 3 of these tokens with their color, 1 to indicate which color they represent, 1 for their scoring path, and 1 for the passing path, shown across the top of the board. At the beginning of each season, a player is given a certain number of tokens from the general supply. This is the general supply, and the player is given a different number of tokens depending upon how many players are in that game. Additionally, at the beginning of each season, a region is set out in which to excavate. The region is made up of a certain number of tiles, also called parcels, and every pair of these is called an area. Now these are laid out like this because even though these are scored as areas, these pairs, the areas here are considered adjacent, and we'll talk about that in a second. So in the 1st through 3rd seasons, 4 pairs are laid out, and in the 4th season, 6 pairs are laid out. During each season, players take turns excavating squares in the region by placing one of their tokens on that square. Only 1 token can be played per square. Players can play in any square except for a square with a pyramid. During the 1st season, players have a choice of beginning a new excavation by playing 1 token in 1 square. They can also extend an existing excavation by playing tokens in 2 squares. Keep in mind that they can play across the dividing line between areas, as well as across the symbol here in the center called a cartouche. When a player can no longer play or chooses not to play, he can pass. To do this, he places his token on the passing track. At that point, the player is done playing for the remainder of the season. When all players have passed, scoring for that season begins. Scoring begins with the area in the upper left corner, and the number of tokens of each color are counted. In this case, green has the majority of tokens and gets first choice about which token he would like or which parcel he would like to take. Parcels have 2 benefits. If there is a number on the cartouche, that represents the number of victory points that are immediately scored when that parcel is collected. Additionally, whether or not there is a number on that, there is the picture of a patron on the alternate side. If green chooses to take this parcel, he will be able to use this patron and its special power. In this case, Mrs. Blackmore has the ability to start a new excavation by placing tokens in 2 squares instead of just 1. So let's say green takes that. Red chooses to pass and place one of its tokens from the general supply in the museum, and we'll talk about that later on. And white, in 3rd place, chooses to take this parcel and gets the benefit of Colonel Tangerine in the future. And we'll talk about the benefits of the various patrons in just a moment. In some cases, there will be a tie. We look at this area here, we see that green and red have tied for 2nd place. And we'll say that blue chooses to take this parcel with Sir Brown on one side, leaving red and green to compete over the remaining parcel. The way the tie is broken is based upon who passed first. In this case, green passed first, green gets the choice, and green chooses to take the tile.
There are several patrons you can appeal to during your excavations. 5 in total. They all have varying abilities. Like Colonel Tangerine will allow you to, when you expand upon dig site, it allows you to do 3 instead of the normal 2. But all of them have different varying abilities that you'll be able to use throughout the game. Each season you have the opportunity to appeal to the special abilities of the patron tiles in your hand. In this case, with Colonel Tangerine, I can only appeal to him once since I only have one single tile. And when you do, you tap into him, and then he's done for the season. Now in this case, Sir Brown, I have 2 versions of him, so I can use him twice in this season.
When reserving rooms in the museum, a player can always take control of a 2 or 3 valued room. A player cannot take control of the 5 valued room until they first control one of the adjacent rooms. At the end of the 4th season, the final scoring round begins. Players are given additional victory points based upon the number of patron tiles they control, and the value of each of those tiles are determined by the highest valued room they control in the region hosted by that patron. Let's look at the values or the points that would be given to the green player during the final scoring round. The green player owns 2 Sir Brown tiles. The highest value room he controls in Sir Brown's region would be 5. So each of the Sir Brown tiles would be worth 5 points each for a total of 10 points. The highest value of room he controls in Mrs. Blackmore's region, indicated by the black plus here, is 2. So he gets an additional 6 points for each of Mrs. Blackmore's tiles. Green controls a 3 valued room here for Lord Lemon, and so he would be given 3 points for this one, and both Lady Violet and Colonel Tangerine would be worth only 1 point because Green controls no rooms in those regions. Additionally, Green is given 5 additional points for each set of 5 patron tiles that he has. In this case, he just has 1 set. Green has a total of 10 plus 6 plus 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 5 for a total of 26 points during the final scoring round. And that would be added in the scoring track to the 8 he already controls from the cartouche values he got in earlier seasons. That gives him a total of 34 points. This would then be done with each of the other players, and the player with the highest score would be considered the winner.
Mykerinos plays 2 to 4 players. Mm-hmm. Now, after several play tests, I really think it's a 3 to 4 player game. It definitely was more enjoyable with 3. 2...
3 to 4 is definitely the sweet spot.
Right. Yep. And then player uptime. Yeah, people were moving. It was quick to go between turns. Every season went by fast.
Right. There's not a lot of analysis paralysis in the game.
Exactly.
It is primarily an abstract game.
Very much so.
But unlike a lot of abstract games, there's not a lot of mulling over what do I do. And no, the turns go fairly quickly, and therefore the seasons go quickly as well.
Exactly. And the mechanics are something unique for most games, but like you said, it's an abstract game. So if that's the kind of game you like, with a very thin theme, and we'll get to that in a minute.
Yes, we will. But you're right. As far as mechanics are concerned, I find it interesting because you're torn between the strategy of getting your pieces in the museum in the right places for the high values, or collecting the patrons to make use of them as early as possible throughout the game.
Very much so.
If you wait too late for that, you might get a lot of patrons, but you'll lose the opportunity to use them effectively.
And there's definitely something to be said for some of the patrons work better earlier in the game than they do later in the game. Yeah. So keep an eye out for that.
Absolutely. And you can also play defensively to make certain your opponents don't get the patrons they really need to score or to use. But that's a little bit more advanced. So it's easy to play not defensively, but if you find yourself losing, look into that and start anticipating your opponent's moves and needs.
Yep, it's a real trade-off. So
Now we'll talk about some of the things we didn't like as much about Mykerinos.
Right.
This week's review is not just a review, but it's also an object lesson for many of you game designers out there about what not to do when you're designing a new game.
Very much so.
So Mark, tell us about things you didn't like.
So right out of the gate, one of the worst things, and I'll throw up an image, but this rule book is almost impossible to read.
Yes.
It's just terrible. The background chosen behind the rule set it just makes it almost unreadable. So that was just a complete, utter, epic failure, I would say. Also, the board is tiny. It should have been double the size. It would have been so much better. And again, the board suffers from the same thing the rulebook does. It's hard to read. And that's probably more due to the fact of being too small. But those are the things that drive me crazy. And then lastly, the theme. Oh, man. It is an abstract game, like we said. But you never get a sense that you're looking for treasure. No. Never, never, never. So those are the things that I really dislike.
I had a person in the first group I played this with, actually, after we ended, said, what? We're excavating for Egyptian treasure? I didn't know that. And she was very fixated on the fact that all the characters seemed like they were rejects from a Clue game.
Yes.
But she didn't get the feeling of the Egyptian motif at all. Now, what Mark said about the size of the board not only makes it somewhat difficult to read, especially for those across the table, but these playing pieces that represent your scoring markers do not fit on the scoring track.
Not even a little bit.
Two of the issues are, one, if they're adjacent to each other, they're going to shove one or the other off of their position on the scoring track. And additionally, the components themselves, if you stack these things on top of each other, you don't know who's underneath, so it makes it very difficult. So the components themselves can be very frustrating, but we found ways to resolve that. One of the things we did to replace the scoring markers, 2 words, Halma pawns. Halma pawns are these little, I'll give you a close-up of these, but basically the 2 advantages are, A, their bases are smaller and they actually fit on the scoring track. Secondly, they are better than ball pawns with the little balls on top, because ball pawns don't stack, but Halma pawns do. So Halma pawns, you can get a set of 10 off the web for about $2 or $3 or your local gaming store. So I highly recommend, if you're going to play this game, invest in just a handful of Halma pawns. For those. Additionally, we use these little stackable counters, and you can look on the web for stackable counters to replace not only the little cardboard circles on the pass track, but also in front of each player to indicate which color they're playing, as well as the patron markers around the museum. So these are stackable counters, as I said. You can buy them in sets of 500, that's right, 50 of each of 10 colors from places like EIA Education, or Learning Advantage online. You might find them very useful in a number of games you have. They're not very expensive, but they're very useful.
Some final thoughts on our verdict. So despite all the downside of things we kept running into for this game, we still enjoyed it, I think.
We did, yes.
It was still fun. I think if you can find it...
at a good price.
Right. I think it's worth picking up. And it does play fairly quickly.
It does. It says 30 to 60 minutes on the box, but once you've learned it, it plays closer to the lower end of that spectrum.
Yeah, and like I said, despite all the downside, which this game seriously needs to be updated. Someone, please. I still think it's a good game, and I'm going to give it 2.5 corners out of 4.
And I would do the same, 2.5 corners out of 4. It's a good game. It's different enough that I think people would find it refreshing. And if you can get it, as we said, for a good price, I think you'll find it fun to play.
Also, as of shooting of this episode, we have a contest on Twitter at the moment.
The prize is for the science fiction double feature expansion for the card game Smash Up.
And the way to enter is use hashtag BGC Smash and tell us your favorite faction. A winner will be chosen on 6/15/2014. So enter as soon as you can, and we'll pick a winner.
That's right.
So until next time, we'll see you at the table.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.